Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
A very good morning to you and welcome to the program. It's a beautiful, work week. I'd like to describe it that way because some persons believe that the week starts on Sunday. Today is Monday and gradually we're nearing the end of the month. Yet, all over the world feels like different stories, different policies emerging right here. Our job is simple. Bring it up to the front burner, have the analysts discuss, and provide solutions on the program. My name is Temple Barra. Welcome to Early Exchange on Souk News Television. I do have in the studio, as usual, for company and partnership, the delectable, lovely.
Bring it on. Is that all?
I mean, that's all. What else do you
You're
want?
stingy with compliments, you see. Good morning.
I mean, delectable and lovely.
I was
What a way to
expecting so much
describe you,
more.
blessing.
Yes, because you know what they say, or what we say in early exchange, the show gets bigger and better. The uncles get
So
bigger and better.
you wanted more.
More accolades, more compliments, you know. But what you've offered, I can manage with that. Delectable, and what was the other thing you said?
Lovely.
Lovely. Oh yes, a lovely morning
Sometimes.
to you. Pay no mind to that. Disregard that. Lovely all the time because it's about you. It's about us shaping policy that concerns business, economy, and development so that you can enjoy the economy that you operate in, and by extension, the world can be better for it. Now, today, we're taking a look at two economies of the world. We could like to call them major economies because, yes, that's what they are. We'll begin with the UK economy, as the Bank of England's cutting rate is not yet certain. There are still those who are on either side, you know, economists just talking about it and rationalizing whether or not the Bank of England will hold rates at 5.25% or cut rates before September, as they plan for their Monetary Policy Committee meeting on Thursday. So it's neither here nor there for lots of economists because of different reasons, while each hold their position.
Well, the last time that happened was in 2020,
Oh,
and
yes.
some years down the line, there's a lot of expectations. But then we also will be hoping to ascertain the impacts, negative and positive. And in case there's no rate cut, like you mentioned, what would that do to the economy of the United Kingdom? And of course, the pound sterling. And yes, we do have our foreign exchange, and the yardstick is the dollar. But then the pound sterling also holds a strong. Has its own place,
And a higher value.
Yeah, exactly. And then at that point, you want to imagine what it will do to economies that also depend on the UK. A little over a while ago, we had the British pull out of the European Union, which led
The
to
Brexit.
the Brexit, and that some school of thought believe had an adverse effect on the residents and of course the UK economy.
Talk about no man is an island.
Exactly. So there are questions about if they've actually how do I move that with the words now? If they've actually survived, that exit, if it's been better for them in the long run, are they still feeling the impact of that exit, or not having the strength in numbers again? So some of that will be talking about, and of course how a potential rate cut would affect their economy and some of the economies that depend on the UK.
We apologize for waking you up from your sleep. We understand it's past midnight in Canada right now.
Yeah, 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 it's fine.
All right.
Yeah,
Because this
thanks.
is a serious matter for
Yeah,
UK residents. By the way, some of us have family members who are UK residents based on the Jackpot thing. So you can understand why we're concerned about what happens in the UK economy, right? That's a joke, by the way. But
yeah,
let's talk about the UK economy. So the Bank of England will be having its MPC meeting on Thursday, and there are speculations as to what that meeting may decide on regarding the rates, which has been incrementally increased from 2020 after the COVID-19 pandemic broke down from 0.1%. It is now at 5.2%. So there's some kind of split, maybe a 50-50 split, if you like, as to if the Bank of England would hold rates at 5.2%, maybe wait around September, or cut rates. What are the odds in your assessment?
Yeah, I think the general expectation is that there will be a cut in rates. Yeah, there will be a cut in rates, just like how you truly, just like what you truly mentioned. Since post-COVID, about 2020, 2021, most countries have been increasing rates, including Nigeria, Canada, US. I think Canada started since 2022, US started around then, UK started about 2021. So it was just a way of tempering down on inflation. The orthodox rule in economics says that when you have an inflation, you increase interest rates. So the essence, the idea behind it is that you take purchasing power, you reduce the purchasing power of the people, because the thinking is that inflation is when you have too much money purchasing few goods, or put in another way, when the amount of or the quantity of goods and services available in the economy is not enough to meet the demand or match the demand of people. So, shortage, scarcity now leads to an increase in prices. So the idea behind increasing rates is you reduce the purchasing power of people, you make fixed assets such as treasury bills and so on, shares, you make them attractive. So people now look at it and so if I can get 25% or 20% interest on treasury bills, so why do I waste it on rice or on beans? So let me just invest. So it's just a way of taking money from purchasing power from people. So the idea is that you reduce the demand. When you reduce my purchasing power, you reduce my demand. So that's excess demand that was too much to meet supply will now come down to match supply. So that's the essence. So after COVID, it was most economies were having tough times. So US, UK, they all increased interest rates. UK at some point recorded a high of 11.11% inflation rate. I think that was like a 40-year high. US went to about 9% too. So that was about 2022. So that's when the rates started. The Bank of England started increasing rates to increase the pressure of their rates increase, and so now it has reduced. June figure shows that inflation in UK has come to 2%, at least so the statistics say. So it's almost expected that you've achieved your purpose, so you should now reverse back to status quo, start cutting down it, because there will also be disadvantages. Increasing rates also comes with its own consequences. So expectation is that by August, there will be cuts in rates. There will be a reversal, probably by 25 basis point or something. Yeah.
Okay, so the current inflation trajectory, how would you say it would impact the likelihood of a rate cut? The current inflation in the UK at the moment, do you think it's going to have impact on the rate cut?
The UK situation is really a paradox for me, because if you have some relatives in UK or anyone you know in UK, they are complaining of very, very high rise. They are complaining of high cost of living. They are complaining of increase in goods, of high prices of groceries, you can understand that mortgage will increase. That's if you want us to talk about it. Yeah, when you increase interest rate, generally it leads to increase in mortgage. But when you have people I don't know about, but when you talk to people, they are going through very, very tough times. Prices of groceries, prices of food services are on the high. So but the figures say that inflation has come to 2%. So that's where the most advanced definition of inflation comes in. The basic inflation definition, which we knew in SS1, SS2 economics, say that inflation is when prices of goods and services are increasing, you say you have inflation. Yeah, but when you now go into advanced economies, you now say, inflation is the rate of price increases, the rate at which price of goods and services increase. So it's not just an increase in prices of goods and services, it's the rate at which price of goods and services increase. So that will now explain it why you have very high cost of living in UK, and yet inflation is as low as 2%. You have people in Canada and UK, just if you do a comparison, you have people in UK who are struggling to come to Canada, struggling to go to US because prices are way cheaper of commodities, of groceries and so on in Canada or in US. Yet, but Canada's inflation figure is 2.7. US inflation figure is 2.9, higher than that of UK, but you have prices still much expensive there. So it just explains that, just the definition, that inflation is a measure of the rate of change of goods. So it means that if you say inflation is 2%, it does not mean that the prices of goods and services have now reduced. No, it's only saying that the rate at which those prices were increasing before has now reduced, has now started trying to find a better way to put. So if probably a bar of chocolate before June, when the inflation figure has fallen to 2%, a bar of chocolate was selling for £500. So in July, in March, it sold for £800. So in June, it's now saying that it will only increase by 2%. But it does not mean that the price, no, they are still going to be buying at the high price. So that's why we always struggle to ensure that inflation does not even come in the first place, because it's almost a non-reversal situation. You can't reverse it. So if before 2022 they were buying a bar of chocolate for £50, but because of inflation of 11%, it went to 500. So it's not going to go back to 50. It will remain at 500. But now it will now be increasing at 2%. So 500 times 2 in July, if it's increasing, if inflation figure is 1.9, it means that the bar of chocolate will increase from £500 times 1.9. So that's the situation. Inflation has, on just from the explanation I gave, the rate of change, the rate of increase has reduced, but prices remain high. So the government has to now tamper down on, because as I said, there are negative sides to continue increasing interest rates. What it does is that when you keep increasing interest rates, it increases your mortgages, because whoever has taken loans for building, whoever has both existing and new loans for mortgage, it's going to impact it. The new interest, when you increase interest rate, it increases the amount of interest that the mortgage owners are going to pay, and they are going to transfer it to their rent. So that's why you have increases, and it would also have multiplier effect on groceries and so on. So they have to, at some point, reduce interest rates so that mortgages come down. And at the same time, in economics, we always say that inflation and growth have inverse relationships. So when in trying to address inflation, most times you are hampering growth. Yeah, because when you increase interest rate, it means lenders who want to borrow money from the bank, because almost every businessman borrows, no matter how large you are. So if he wants to borrow money from the bank, he has to borrow at that high interest rate, and he's going to impact it on his goods and services. It's going to reduce, because if I'm to borrow at 10% when I could have borrowed at 5%, it means I'll cut down capacity. I'm not going to be able to pay that interest. I will reduce my staff. If I was producing 1,000 bars of chocolate,
we'll get into what could
50,
happen if rates are increased or kept at the current level that it is much later, as we'll discuss. But for now, let's look at the causes of the inflation. Now, you've mentioned that inflation has risen. Even when it drops, it doesn't necessarily mean a drop in the prices of goods and services. One of the factors that have led to the inflation in the UK is services. Earlier, while my co-anchor and I were talking, he mentioned Brexit. What has Brexit got to do with the current inflation challenge that the UK is facing, particularly as it concerns services inflation, which is at 6.0%.
Brexit had played a role, but I don't know how significant it was, but it also played a role because they obviously got out of some agreements, some bilateral trade agreements, some educational agreements, and so on. So they 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 exited themselves from those kind of. And you know, there's benefit in those when you have trade unions, just like ECOWAS, and so the big countries compensate for the smaller countries. There's this cooperation, you have this agreement. So by the time you decide to go on your own, so it means you are not getting those prices. You want to get gas, you want to get foodstuffs. You are not going to get it at the prices that your agreement, the concessions that those agreements provided. So you are going to be getting it just like a non-EU country. So that's the position that Britain put themselves when they left. But I think it was, UK situation is a bit unique because they are not one of the large industrialized European economies. It's you can barely point to any big secondary products or manufactured product UK produces. So it was tough for them to go on their own, but at the same time they needed to, I think they wanted to benefit from education fund, foreign international students bringing money into the economy, so they wanted to change their rules, give post-study visa. Most European countries don't do that. When you study, you go back to your country, but UK needed to give incentives for foreigners to come. So they needed to change those policies, and they couldn't have done that by remaining members of Brexit. So it was a give and take. They got the education side of it because they made real money, enough pounds from education, what do you call educational tourism, especially from less developed economies. But at the same time, they also lost out from bilateral agreements. They could not get those concessional agreements that they probably would have gotten from other European countries. So Brexit had a role to play, but not so significant in my view. It was more of post-COVID. Post-COVID came with three major things. Came with supply disruptions because you had industries that were closed down during the lockdown. Then it also came with very increased demand, consumption. Everybody was demanding at the same time. There was a rise in global demand, which supply constraint could not meet because most companies were closed throughout the period. Then just immediately after 2021, February, I remember Russia attacked Ukraine. It affected gas prices. And these European countries, even when they say summer is as cold as Hamatan in Nigeria, so they still rely on gas. So those three things impacted them. So, but Brexit had a role, but it was more of the three other factors that I mentioned. Yeah.
If this rate cut were to happen after the meeting in August, do you think it's going to have any impact globally on trade or investment? I mean, globally, looking at it on a more global scale, not just the UK now.
Yeah, for UK on the domestic scene, I think the services which your anchor mentioned, 6% increase in services. Yes, if it's cut down, it would most likely, because services has a way of lag. It usually has a lag response, unlike goods and services. Goods and services could respond. You cut rates, you might get an immediate response within a short time of 3 to 6 months. Those goods that were increasing at a rate of 7% before start increasing at 2%. But services really has a longer lag from empirical evidence. It takes probably a year or so. So those, even you reduce, if the Bank of England finally reduces or cuts down rates, no matter how small, services might reduce. So that will impact the domestic sector. But on the global scale, I don't see how much it does because really, honestly, rate cuts, it's a domestic issue. It has very little to do with the strength of your currency in the international sector, because when you cut rates, what it just does is that it helps lenders. So if it's a country that it's an export country, export nation like China, they are known for exports. Then when you cut rates, then it should have an impact on international sector, because it means that manufacturers will now be able to access loans more, and they will be able to produce more, and they will be able to export more. So, but for UK, it's not, in my opinion, it's not one of the large exporting countries globally. So it might not have so much impact in the international globally, but it would, of course, it would strengthen the economy, because currently the economy even went on recession. That's why I said that fighting inflation and economic growth usually are two opposites. So most time when you are treating one, you are harming the other. So you see, UK went into recession, though very, very quite minute. Third, and recession is back-to-back negative growth. And in the third quarter of last year, they had -3%, -0.3, -0.03. Then last quarter they had -0.01. So it affects. So they went on a recession just because of so cutting rates I think it will have most of a domestic impact than an international impact, for the reason that UK is not so much of a big export producing nation, and reducing rates most times has very little impact on your currency in terms of strengthening it, except for foreign portfolio investments. Yeah, so when you reduce rates, most times most of those people who will come and buy, investors who will come from outside to buy your instruments, will now even leave. Yeah, because they will go to markets like Nigeria that are offering higher rates. So it might even reduce the strength of the currency outside. So it's really not a straight answer. If it's for a big country, a big exporting country like China, cutting rates will definitely strengthen the the currency. But for a country that is not a very large exporting nation like UK, Nigeria, then it might not have very significant impact globally. Yeah.
All right, so let's turn to the U.S., where the country is also, the Federal Reserve is considering cutting rates in September. Rate stands currently at between 5.25% to 5.50%. Will that in any way affect other countries, being considering the position of the U.S. as a major economy and the biggest economy also
Of
in the
course.
world?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. We expect it to affect the global economy. They say when US sneezes, the world shakes. So we expect that it would affect. US have been, in fact, the campaigns recently have been on inflation. The Biden, the Democrats, and the Republicans. The accusations from the Democrats, from the Republicans, that there has been soaring inflation. Yeah, but it's still 2.90. It was 3.70 in May. It has come to 2.90. So it's still very manageable. It's just that, for countries that are developed countries, they are used to very low inflation figures compared to in Nigeria that is hovering around 35%. China currently is just about 0.1, 0.2, not even up to 1% inflation. So if US will expect that they might cut rates. They all go. Canada just cut last week, reduced rate by 25 basis points. US has been increasing since 2022. So they are at a point now where you've got 2.90, so why don't you loosen up a little bit? That's one. Then two, as I said, when you keep increasing rates, you are reducing the purchasing power of individuals, and it gets to a point where they're almost pushed to the wall. You've listened to commentaries from Americans; they are all complaining that the purchasing power, their salaries have reduced in real terms, even if nominally the salary remains. And so if US cuts rates, we expect that it will strengthen their currency a bit. Yeah, because the domestic economy would get strong. It means that manufacturers will be able to now access loans at a lower cost. Rates would come down, mortgages would come down. So for the manufacturers, businessmen who want to lend, they now have a higher So if I was to borrow at 8% and you have reduced it to 6%, I can borrow more, leverage on that, increase capacity, and definitely US is a big exporting nation. They increase their exports, it means they will get more forex, and so it's a win-win situation. The world gets more of their products, they get more forex in. They also have a very serious debt body. Their debts overhang right now is about 31 trillion, at least according to the Republican presidential candidate when he was campaigning. So they have lots on their hands. They are funding wars from left, right, and center. So they need it. They need the forex too. The world needs more of their products. So it would affect. It would have a very big, huge impact globally. Yeah.
Okay, Doctor, let's take a look at the US economy just a little bit more than you have done at the moment.
Mm,
GDP growth,
yeah.
unemployment rate. Yes, we do have an election at hand. I was wondering if you could, juxtapose that with, the policies that they plan, talking about the rate cuts as well.
Yeah. So increase in interest rate will definitely. So that's why I was mentioning that inflation rate comes with a negative impact on economic growth. So that's why the orthodox method of increase in rates when there's an inflation sometimes is not always helpful. Just that for formal economies, where almost everything is centralized, everything is in the formal sector. Like in Nigeria, for example, that you have a very wide informal sector. So that's why Nigeria has been increasing interest rates since 2021, and inflation keeps going up. All other countries, at least developed countries, who increase interest rates the same time in Nigeria, their inflation has been coming down because the formal sector is very large, 80-90%. So it means if CBN says we increase it, everybody has to conform, because you really don't have so much alternative. Unlike in Nigeria, I can now go to the IDA, I can go to some small cooperatives to borrow money. Those ones are not within the banking sector. So even the central bank can be increasing rates for all they care. I will just be going to my informal sector to borrow. But in developed countries, it's difficult to that. When the central bank or the central authority increasing interest rate, it affects the whole economy. It means I will not be able to borrow. Some businessmen will even get out of business. Some will have to close shop. Some would lay off workers, definitely, yeah, because rate went as high as, yes, about 6-7% in US, about 5.25 now. That's high. It was before rates started increasing in post-COVID. You will not believe that interest rate was just about 0.1. That's very negligible. So a businessman in US, it's not like we in Nigeria that are almost used to borrowing. Right now, borrowing rate for a lender is about 35%. So it means that by 2021, 2022, before rates were increased, a businessman in US was used to borrowing for just 0.1% from the commercial bank. That's very negligible. So you now say you should borrow at 5%, that's 500% increase. It's not going to continue at the scale at which he was producing. It's going to reduce capacity, and that would definitely mean that there will be some closures, there will be layoff. Unemployment rate has increased quite remarkably. I think it's about 8% now. You've been hearing during the campaigns, you've had citizens complain. So when unemployment rate increases, it also means that your wage will reduce, your purchasing power for those that remain in job will reduce. Then government will have to now do more of social services, unemployment benefits. It would also affect the national treasury, because you have to borrow to be able to do that, and increase taxes. So it's brought a lot of hardship on the American, relatively, not the kind of Nigerian hardship, but relative to what they are used to. It brought lots of hardship, and that's why there has been so much so much criticism of the Joe Biden administration, because of he had to do it, at least, because if he met inflation, he just came after COVID, so he had to increase. And in trying to tamper down inflation rate, which they've succeeded in doing, growth must always suffer, because increasing interest rate means that you cannot borrow enough to, and what's growth? GDP, growth is an increase in GDP. And what GDP? GDP is amount of goods and services that you're able to produce. So if you are now reducing your capacity, it means you cannot produce enough. GDP falls. So, and when GDP falls, it affects welfare, standard of living, and so on. So that's just what happened in America. So we expect that reduction in rates would serve as a boom. You now have people borrowing. Everybody can, businessmen can now borrow as much as they want. Though I know it's still not going to be a very massive cut, probably 25 basis points. So from 5.25, it could come to 4.75 or something. But at least it would be an improvement, albeit probably not significant. Yeah.
How do you think the rate cut would impact the financial sector, saying that the current rate did impact the financial sector with some regional banks collapsing?
Yeah, of course. When you increase rates, it's also most times most central banks bring alongside increasing rates now also impose liquidity ratio increase in the liquidity ratios that the bank has to keep with their central bank. So it's like you are hitting them from both sides. You increase rates, and when you have increased rates, it means that lenders are going to, as I mentioned, they will reduce their borrowings, and banks make money from borrowing. That's the only source of profit for banks. At least the major source, 80 to 90%, is from borrowings. So they collect deposits from you. They pay you 2% on your deposit. Meanwhile, they borrow out and get 7%. So the 5% is their profit. But when CBN or the central bank, the Fed of here, let's use US now, Federal Reserve has increased rates, and I also come and borrow $500 million, for example. I'm now borrowing $50 million. The 450 that I should have borrowed is like a burden on the banks. They have the deposit, but nobody is coming to take it. So it was a big burden on finance. They were keeping so much liquidity. And liquidity is it's like a liability for banks. That's why when you check banks, when you check their book, their statement of account at the end of the year, loans is an asset. Why for you who took the loan is a liability, but for the bank it's an asset because he has given you the loan, he's making interest from it every month. You have to pay the principal. So, but by the time their loans has reduced because interest rate has increased, it's clearly a liability for the bank. It's clearly a discouragement for the banks, and it means that the banks are running out of business. So you definitely expect that it's a burden on the financial sector, and those small banks who are not able, who have little small networks. Some are not, some don't operate outside the country. For some who operate in UK, operate in Canada, who operate outside, then they can make money from the holding companies. The parent company might not make so much, but the holding company will bring. But for small banks who are just local, that would be tough for them. So most of them had to merge. Some had to be acquired. So it's an increase in rates definitely impacts negatively on the financial sector. Yeah.
One more question from me, Doc. You mentioned just before you responded to Blessing's last question, the elections, and of course, both the Democrats and the Republicans have been going head to head as regards some of these economic policies and how it has affected the common, in quotes, American. But then the political class, how do you think pressure from politicians have affected the Federal Reserve's decision, to go this road or to toe this line in its decision-making process?
Yes, as we have been told, we've been made to believe that the Federal Reserve is quite independent, of government. That's what theory tells us, and so far, at least, evidence does not seem to negate that position. Same thing with the Bank of England. Same thing with the most developed economies. They are central banks. They are quite independent government. So it gives them as much room to make decisions that, to make decisions that are independent of whatever the president or his regime thinks. So I want to believe that that's the situation, and that pressure from politicians, whatever the rhetoric is not affecting their decision, because really, intuitively, it just makes common sense that it's just like you've been trying to hit a rat. For example, you want to kill the rat. You've been hitting, then it's dead. So why hit it? What's the point? Continue doing. At some point, you are now overdoing it, overreaching. Yeah, so that's just the point. So if inflation, like in UK, went to 11% in 2022, just post COVID, in US went to about 10.2%. That was the record high for 40%. It has now come to 2.90 US from 10.1, 10.2. Then it only makes sense that you backtrack. Yeah, you've achieved. So yeah, it was about 1.8 before COVID. 2.9 is fair enough, considering that if the rate increase was not having didn't have any consequence on the economy, then it's fine. But considering that it's affecting GDP, affecting employment, it just makes sense that they now at least reverse a bit, no matter how much. So even if they do that, even if they cut rates, I will not want to believe that it has any political inclination. I just think it makes sense that they do it at this point. Yeah.
Let's relate what's happening in the US and the UK to what has been happening in Nigeria. Just last week, the CBN's MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, increased rates from 26.25% to 26.75%. You've talked about how inflation how the CBN has tried to control inflation in Nigeria, as well as the Bank of England has tried in the UK, and then the Federal Reserve has tried in the US. What are the lessons to learn from what the US and UK have done in terms of the monetary policy tools and even in the operation of the economy? What can Nigeria learn, seeing that we're having different results even with the same approach?
Yeah, we can learn two things. Firstly, our formal sector and our informal. I've always said it. Our formal, we have to reduce the informal sector. The informal sector is too wide. We've been told in textbook that it's 50% formal and informal, but I believe it's 70-30%. So I think we have to close down that sector. If not, it will get to a point where CBN is almost, and their policy is almost useless. Informal sector in terms of the real sector, in terms of the foreign market, that's the parallel and exchange, official exchange rate. But in terms of the real sector, I used to ask then that, I used to use the example of the town where I was staying, Benin, that there's the biggest market. Let's even use Lagos. I think this is a Lagos television station. Let's Alaba, for example, as big as Alaba market is. I'm sure we can count how many. If you go to the market, those stores, and ask them, please show me your CAC, show me your tax, FRS, 3 years tax statement that you have paid to show you've paid your taxes. Show me your 3 years audited accounts. I can probably bet that of the 1,000 shops in Alaba market, not up to 5 will give you those information. And that's the only way you can borrow money from the bank. Go to the bank that you want to borrow money as a businessman. Those are the things they are going to ask you for: your last 3 years audited report, last tax report, CAC. So it means that you now ask yourself, where do these people borrow money from? So it means that whatever CBN is doing in terms of rates increase would not have any impact. It will just be like pouring water on a coconut, for example. So until we have this large formal sector, because it's only the formal sector that CBN and its policies have a grip on. So CBN can keep doing whatever they are doing and it won't have any impact. So that's one we should learn. We should try to bring the info, but unfortunately, with the policies that government keeps churning out, it's even widening the informal sector. For example, the Naira redesign alone, that alone pushed people out of the informal sector. Many people swore that they will never take their monies to the bank Then you see the banks bringing, you see cyber tax, security. Yeah, we know that has been reduced, that was reviewed, but there are so many other SMS charge, so many other taxes that government has put. So you see people looking at their statement phones, they see that their balance in last month was 2,000. This month is 1,500. You just see piffing, small. So you are further increasing the informal. So that's one lesson we could learn, the informal and formal sector disparity. Then also the other lesson we could learn is the fact that you see US and UK, when they've increased rates, it has impacted directly because they are countries that carry out large trade. But for Nigeria, we are still local in our trade. What do we really produce? We are more of an importing nation. So it means that no matter how much we increase rates, those foreign portfolio investment, they will just come, investors, they will just come, buy the rates. When after a month, they sell it and they get out. Just like when CBN was trying to impact the our foreign exchange some 2-3 months ago, when dollar came down to about 900 naira to a dollar. So CBN was increasing rates. Most of these foreign portfolio investors came to buy our treasury bills and so on. But after a month or so, when they made the profit, the discount, they sold it and they left. Why? Because we don't have foreign direct investment is what brings these investors for forex permanently. So I think those are the lessons that we can learn from those examples. The formal and informal sector gap, it's something that we have to close like immediately. If not,
All right,
I
thank
don't
you
know.
very much, Dr.
Yeah.
Osaye Iyoha. You have, done justice to the conversation this morning. We really appreciate you, especially taking a bit of your sleep away from you. A couple of hours wouldn't hurt. I dare to say that. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me. You have a good day. Thanks.
You too.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.